Hi, I'm Carissa Foco, and this is Over the Top, Under the Radar, a weekly look at the stories in the news that are overreported and the ones going completely under the radar and not being talked about enough. This week's episode is an in-depth conversation with Seyi Akiwowo, an expert in technology and online safety. Seyi is a former politician, recovering politician, used to say, who set up a brilliant NGO that, it set up around the time I was also co-founding an organisation for women's rights. So it was called Glitch, and it was really focused about online safety for women, for Black women, for all communities, but with a specific feminist lens. And I guess I'd call you like an activist and a writer.
Thank you.
You're a brilliant speaker. You put loads of work into getting the Online Safety Act, which has finally passed, to be vaguely decent.
Hallelujah.
Commissioned research. You've done a lot of work. It's funny, we've overlapped a few times. You've done a lot of work with a lot of the big social media platforms, partly because you yourself experienced online abuse when you were a politician.
Yeah.
And I guess I think of you as like someone who knows a lot about technology and how to make it better.
Yeah. And I think I know a lot about technology and wanting to make it better from a place of play and joy and fun, because that's what was interrupted for me. I've really taken the last year, now not running an organization, to really work out what is my relationship with tech and my role and my mission. And the online abuse that I received in 2016 was like an interruption into how I was expressing myself online, communities that I was building. And it made me sometimes a bit fearful. It made me very intentional, but it felt like there was this interruption in playing with technology. My analysis of the online space is how do we make sure that tech doesn't disrupt health and joy and pleasure and community? And when I was a politician, and I'm really glad that we're doing this podcast in my local area, Newham. When I was a politician, I could see tech beginning to fester in communities in great ways, but fester in really bad ways, where young boys were going missing and were being kind of groomed on Snapchat to sell drugs on the county lines, and that wasn't being discussed. So I started kind of seeing where communities that were being surveillanced, their data was not being protected, they were not in the conversation. And then this thing happened to me. And I knew that I had my privilege of a connection to the police, politics, and, party systems and stuff. And I knew that I was in a privileged position that if I didn't have that, I wouldn't have been respected by the authorities, and I wouldn't have been respected by tech companies.
So let's talk a bit about that for people who don't know. You gave a speech in the European Parliament. It was on YouTube, is that right? Or it just went
was
viral?
in European Parliament, and then they put it on their social media platforms, which is why in the book I talk about having responsibilities online and being mindful of your platform and your reach, and where if you're amplifying someone, taking caution that your followers that may be good and bad, or maybe haters, could then end up following the people that you promote. But yeah, the European Parliament posted it on their Facebook page. It was fine for a few days, and then all of a sudden I started receiving horrific death threats and rape threats and stuff. And I've had other incidences of online abuse, like stalking and pylons and things like that. And it kept interrupting the work that I was doing to get more young people into politics or women into politics. And that's where I come from. I don't want to keep talking about harm reduction. I want to talk about how does this keep interrupting people being able to take up their rightful spaces as citizens offline and online.
You being you, very dynamic. You experienced this thing. You set up an organization designed to fix the glitch and in online spaces, and you wrote a book. From the nearly 10 years you've been in this space, what have you learned? And do you feel like things are getting better or are they getting worse?
I feel like more people are understanding what online harms are. A lot of the kind of digital rights conversations was either really focused on children, protecting children, and that was even seen as a very homogeneous group. Like girls' experiences online was not really kind of discussed. It was all about kind of surveillance, data, GDPR, the kind of harder stuff, important, but it was like the harder stuff. So when we were talking about online abuse and tech facilitated harms, it felt like it was slipping in the gap between women's sectors who are stretched and can't keep up with all forms of patriarchal oppression, and it wasn't a priority of the majority white tech space and digital rights space, and they weren't seeing women. And it felt like there was this gap, and people were slipping through it. And it wasn't just women, it was then I was seeing how Black women were disproportionately being marginalized out of the conversation. In the way I want to show up in the invitations that I was accepting, I was learning from our disabled communities. I was learning from those who are neurodivergent, and I was really understanding a 360 experience of other people online that weren't just your typical white men in tech that are talking about regulation from their perspective.
There's so much there that I want to get into. yeah, one of the things that was great about Glitch when I got to work with you guys is that you were really just like carving out a space and making sure that everyone was included and doing your best to sort of broaden out conversations.
Yeah, I think that's important because I never really wanted Glitch to be seen as a Black women's organization, because then we get pigeonholed and it becomes that thing. It was understanding that centering Black women's experiences gives us a deeper understanding of how we policy make around safety, because we know that Black women are disproportionately impacted. I never wanted it to become like an identity politics thing. It just so happens I was a Black woman, I think, and that's why in the organization we trained up our white colleagues to be able to speak in confidence and sensitively on misogynoir, which is the intersection of misogyny and racism, because it shouldn't just be Black women that are talking about Black women's experiences, but understanding that it's a really helpful lens to design efficiently and effectively.
Yeah, I think that's like that point is something I think it's really worth people understanding that it's if you design from the perspective of a Black woman or someone experiencing a lot of oppression, that often then you make something that's safe for everyone.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And that was because I was like, oh, fix the glitch. Then I started realizing how many glitches there were. And then how there was many glitches in the philanthropy scene and how fundraising actually worked. And there was glitches in the charity scene and how that worked, and then the governance scene. And it was just like there was just so many glitches. So actually flipping it around now and having a year out of my organization, I don't think it's about centering one identity anymore, because we've seen how identity politics is being weaponized. I think it's now saying, how do we want to build healthy communities, healthy societies, healthy relationships with each other and online, moving away from identity politics that I think is no longer serving us, because these social media algorithms perpetuate this kind of us versus them. And this solo identity is not going to help us get to liberation, in my opinion.
Well, there's a few things I want to touch on before we get into like the meat of the conversation. I wanted just to give your like summary of the Online Safety Act, because it was started by the last government. It felt like it was just like permanently being talked about, and it has now passed. What should people know about it? Is there anything that's like good in there that we should be aware of? Are there any big gaps? Like for people who are a bit less familiar with tech regulation, what should people know about the Online Safety Act?
The way I would describe the Online Safety Act is providing a kind of baseline level around harm, and understanding that tech companies, like many other industries, have a duty of care to their users. That is what it did establish, is like a baseline. Are we happy with it? Is it like everything we want? No, but it is a standard in which tech companies that want to operate in this market must make sure that they have these basic things. One of the basic things that we were asking for was a code of practice around violence against women and girls, because we know that women are disproportionately impacted by online violence. We know that Black women are 84% more likely to be abused online. We know that when Twitter was Twitter, a woman was abused every 30 seconds. Like there was just so much data out there. And this, how do you actually design and hold companies accountable to that, to that? This code of practice sets that out. There are other things in there around age verification, age assurance, which I think is important. And I know that is a controversial topic, but if we know that certain content online, particularly very extremist content, violent content, particularly misogynistic content, is shaping cultural norms, is shaping young boys being radicalized to join movements like Andrew Tate, incel movements, and Tony Robinson, then we need to be ensuring there's infrastructure and regulation that says certain content and certain age groups shouldn't be able to see this kind of content. And that's what this Online Safety Act tries to do through a risk assessment approach, and understanding what are the kind of risks these search engines, these social media platforms, big and large, must adopt to risk assess. And I like that approach, because as a former politician, when we had sadly young people die in our care as a corporate parents, or you heard of a woman dying by domestic violence, there would be a whole case review to understand what were the infrastructural failures, where was the safeguardings that dropped. And I think it's beginning to shape that kind of language and expectation, because prior to this we just kept thinking, oh well, it's a lawless place, it's just to be expected, what can you do about it? I think it's now activated people to say, actually no, we're going to hold you accountable. And that's what I'm proud that Online Safety Act does do.
That's really helpful to understand. And so for people who might be aware that age verification came in on like things like pornography
Yeah.
websites, you can't just sort of click through, which
No.
actually it feels kind of wild that you could before.
Yeah, and
That
and
like a
and
child with a device could just like
put
click
put
through
put a
onto
fake
Pornhub or
put
something,
a fake
or
date of birth in, and
yeah.
yeah, and I just the outrage that I saw, I was just so shocked that adults didn't want to have a little bit more friction with accessing porn in in service to the next generation of young, impressionable people who are accessing the most violent content. And I would also say there was many chances that the previous government and other governments around the world have given tech companies to self-regulate, and they haven't done that, and they flip-flopped and they've watered things down. And so that's why there has to be government intervention around these things.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking my language. One of my many bugbears is like how little tech companies are regulated and how poorly we hold them to account. But I wanted to talk about, you sort of talked about extreme content there. The thing we wanted to talk about specifically today is, I guess, how online safety and feminism intersect. One of the reasons we want to have this conversation is a woman called Bonnie Blue, and she would describe herself.
I think she'll describe herself as an adult content creator, but she
Mm,
came on my radar as somebody who was using OnlyFans, which again is a very mature, established, very safe, but because it's about sex, we don't get to have that conversation about OnlyFans, but it's a very safe platform for content creators of any sorts. And there are a lot of adult content creators on there or sex workers on there. Again, something that is a tension in feminism, right? The right to engage in sex as a way of earning money. But Bonnie Blue was now doing these challenges where she wanted to sleep with like 1,000 men in 24 hours and was filming these things and it was and a lot of money. And then the thing that caused me a lot of concern was when she now started working with Andrew Tate, and how this extremism, no matter what the ideology is, whether it's extreme left, extreme right, extreme feminism, extreme misandry, it all leads back to a supremacy, all leads back to an idea that one identity or one group of people are better than another. And that was my concern, that
what was she doing with Andrew Tate?
I dare not watch it. I
Oh
dare
God. So
not give
would she
it.
have said she's a feminist, or is her position that she's like a? I mean,
Well,
the thing that the thing that you sort of unpack in your article is this idea of like, it is possible for her to be a feminist and for you to not agree with what she's doing.
Absolutely. That's what we've got to make sure that we have cultural norms around, that we don't now start having these morality debates about people's choice of agency and what they do with their agency to tell them they're not feminist or not. That for me is a very scary line, and it becomes censorship as well. Another example is where we often see traumatic videos of Black women going viral online. Most recently was a Black woman in America who was evidently in a lot of pain in her labor and was being dismissed by nurses. And it was, I guess, her way of storytelling how Black women experience maternal health and why Black women in the UK are 5 times more likely to die given childbirth. And then there was now this conversation about how these content shouldn't exist. They should be banned by social media. And I was like, well, no, just because you don't like it and you're uncomfortable does not mean that that content shouldn't exist. However, we should be having a conversation around agency and how do we make sure that we don't see this type of content. And I think that's my concern around who gets to be a feminist or not. It's like, who gets to be like the security guard in the club. And I was like, we don't get to make that decision. Feminism is about every woman being able to have full agency and autonomy over her body. We may not like her decision and her behavior, but we have to respect her right to. Now, when it comes back to tech, what is the infrastructure tech should be put in place? Well, we know, for example, tech run on outrage. We know that they want there to be these big dialogues, this us versus them. So we need to be mindful that we're not perpetuating the same way that profits are being made at the expense of ourselves and division in society. So that's one. Two, we know that when these debates happen, shunning people and saying that you're not morally fit to join this club only means that they go to darker spaces and more unsafe communities, right? Everyone wants the right to belong. Where I think we should be having the conversation is, where do we want that type of content to be amplified? Where do we get a choice in the toxicity levels that we want to be seeing? And I think the thing that's particularly worrying about Bonnie Blue is that she seemed to be targeting barely 18-year-olds, like people who've just turned 18, who are still young and impressionable. And again, what's the feminist take around those boys thinking that's their way of like losing their virginity? What's the feminist take around them being seen as children and needing to be cared for, and them deserving a beautiful sexual relationship too? Like, it's not just, those conversations are not just for girls. And so it just seemed really short-sighted and very narrow, the conversation that Bonnie Blue has pricked up, I think, for us. And that's why I wanted to write something about it. I think it's too cheap and quick to say she's not a feminist.
Yeah, and just to be like, that's gross, what she's doing is terrible. And I think you've hit on a couple of things I want to talk about. So one is, and you gave the example of the woman who sort of filmed her like pretty traumatic childbirth experience. The algorithms now, they do prefer extreme content, right? Like that's the common thread, that they don't just want, you know, you and me having a cup of tea in a chat. They want us having a fight or screaming at each other. And is that something that's true? Like, you work in this space? true across all the social media platforms?
And it's true, and it's also a choice, because I think we know that they want engagement metrics. We know that they want to show their advertisers that we can keep people on the platform, and this is how we get them engaged. But you can evoke many other human emotions that keep us engaged, like dog content, right? I'm running a shower, I'm like trying to get in, and I quickly check, Instagram to see what's going on. And I'm like realizing, crap, I'm there for a long time because I'm looking at dog content. I'm not looking at content that's
Okay,
making
you're
me
a dog, but you're okay, cute dogs.
cute
Yeah.
dogs, right? Because that is keeping me on the platform. So I think there's a design decision around, okay, yes, you may want our attention, which we can have a separate conversation, but do you have to design it in the way that makes us ill, keeps us dysregulated, keeps us in fear? Because if you keep creating those conditions, you're creating the condition for coercive control. And that's what I don't like about who gets to have the moral argument of who's a feminist or not, who's truly living values or not. Where do we start? It means it weakens the ability to hold multiple truths and sometimes conflicting truths, which is part of humanity, right? We are able to hold dialogue. And with extremism, it means that we end up just believing kind of the same script and solo policies, rather than being this broad church and confusion sometimes and conflict and tensions. If we now are all singing from the same hymn sheet, it feels very dictatorial.
It always feels a bit strange to me when people are trying to police feminism, because it's like, isn't this about women being free? And
Yeah,
suddenly
free and not
we're
perfect.
telling women how they can be free or how they can kind of express what they want. But I think it does end up with you defending people whose actions you might not like, but who you sort of support the right to do what they want of, which kind of brings us a bit onto free speech. Like, where do you stand on all of those sort of free speech conversations in online spaces? Because it's very much considered to be something of the right, but a lot of your work and activism is about what can we say online, what's it safe to say online? Like, where do you stand on all of those sorts of debates?
Yeah. Are we saying free speech, or are we saying we want to hear the kind of speech that makes us feel good? And post COVID, right, where a lot of us are still very traumatized and very sensitive, and our nervous system needs a lot of soothing. Are we trying to create policies and govern and create communities and organizations that are still that are very narrow minded about the kinds of speeches we want to hear? And so we're trying to govern around a level of discomfort, when growth, creativity is all about conflict and failure and getting it wrong and being able to have a resilience to conflict. Now, I'm not at all condoning, it's in my book, I'm not condoning being called the N-word, being sent death threats. Those things are illegal. So all we're asking is for tech companies to adhere to the rule of law. But now when we're starting to say with content moderation, we've seen the flip. We've seen that flip, right? Because we saw Zuckerberg, who was looking like Drake in January. We saw
Weird
him.
transformation.
Right? I was like, I thought it was AI. I did not
That's so
not believe
good.
it.
Did you hear the song he dropped on Spotify? Like he did a weird
No.
remix of like a Flow Rider song or something. It was very odd. It was very odd.
I mean, again, probably doing these things so he goes viral and then we keep saying his name, right? But we saw when we put content moderation in the hands of companies, how that flipped depending on who was going to be in power.
Yeah.
And so actually, do we set content moderation on our human rights, which is our right to speech and expression of all sorts, but then we get to choose what speech we see and consume? That's what I have a problem with. And I think Musk with X is kind of doing that with the option to see who you follow. Like we get to decide who you follow, and it's in chronological order, which means we have more agency of what we're seeing. Whereas Instagram, TikTok, we don't really have that much agency over what we're consuming, how long we're consuming it for. And I think that's where the conversation should move to. I don't go around telling other businesses what they can and cannot do. Right? Or I don't, because I'm not in government. I don't think governments go around telling business what they cannot do, but they do have a safety level to say this is going to impact wider harms or impact future societies, like food standard agencies. Like
that's the example that sprung up to me. Yeah, you can't like serve raw chicken. You can't you shouldn't be able to. I mean, there are different levels of hygiene ratings, but like you can't like give people food with dirty cutlery. But no one is telling people how to make their jollof.
Thank you. Although you should make it the Nigerian way.
Oh, Ghanaian way. Absolutely not. I forgot about this division. Okay. So yeah, okay. Well, we won't start fighting about jollof. But yeah, it feels like in the world of technology, we're just behind where other companies are. Like if you thought about, some people talk about tech companies like big tobacco. I personally think they're a bit more like pharmaceutical companies.
Yeah.
They make stuff that has benefits to us, and that's, there are lots of good things about technology, and you don't want the people running pharmaceutical companies to just have no rules and regulations.
Absolutely.
Like, even with the ones we've got, they don't always behave well. So I think that sense of like, there have to be guardrails, there have to be rules, and we have to make sure they work online. Another thing that's really in your book that I wanted to make sure we touched on is you're really clear on companies need to do better. This is how we work with them. Government needs to regulate. You've helped to pass legislation. And you're pretty clear that it's our own jobs as well to keep ourselves safe online. You talk a lot about digital self-care in the book, and I know that's something you've done workshops on. Like, can you just explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think my belief is we are digital citizens, so we've got rights and responsibilities. And part of our digital rights is to be able to be online and not get abused because we're a Black woman or because we wear a hijab. Like that should exist. But we also have responsibilities. And I think that's being responsible. If you apply it to other rights, being responsible in voting or being responsible at school. So what's our responsibilities online to ourselves and each other? Like, what's the new social contract? And I think that's still being developed. But one thing we can do for ourselves is manage our own well-being, manage and take care of ourselves. And I think there is beauty in that because it allows for there to be spaciousness. When you're grounded and intentional, you are creating your own friction with the urge to want to always be online or the urge to pick up your phone, and where your thumb has the muscle memory to remember which app is where, right?
It really
without even
does.
looking at it. Like when you're like getting out of that trance. And I think it is, and I'm at risk of pissing people off, but I think it's a little bit immature and juvenile to blame all of tech companies for our inability to have a stronger relationship with tech. Yes, there are things that are designed in a way that incentivizes us, just like gambling is designed in that way, just like certain foods are. These things exist, right? But if we take in holistic therapy and somatic work, the role that we have is to look after ourselves and meet our needs and find that peace within. And I think self-care provides that so that we don't now use tech as a coping mechanism, or we end up being on these platforms and then start joining these groups that actually start becoming a little bit too radicalized, that we actually get a sense of ourselves and our own value system. That's what's going to navigate us through, is being able to confidently look at ourselves in the mirror and say, I'm proud of how I acted today, right? I'm proud of how I acted today, offline and online. So I guess it's bringing some kind of responsibility to how we conduct ourselves than just thinking that we're replicating the same kind of relationship with our family systems, right? Where we want someone to kind of look after us and rescue us. And we all believe the kind of Disney Channel fairy tale of, being saved by some kind of prince or something, right? We don't now project that onto tech and ask tech to save us. Tech is not going to save us. It's a business. Yeah. And yes, it's a business that is now infiltrating more of our public square and it's shaping policies and stuff. And we hold them accountable. But this idea that we offset any individual responsibility, for me, just feels really immature.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, there's obviously, as you say, like, it's possible for like tech to be a villain and there to be bad behaviors and inappropriate behaviors from these companies. And also we still have agency. Like, we're not
And we're also
completely...
choosing to use these platforms, or some people are choosing to use these platforms to spread misinformation, to spread rumors, to spread lies. Like, there are still people that are choosing to do that, right? And as we were saying earlier, a lot of this stuff is playing out more online because we have lost the third space. We have lost
we've lost
the
those
libraries. We have
spaces.
lost our youth centres, which is why I'm so glad that we're here at Link Studio in Community Links, which is run by Catch 22, because we do need to plug back into our youth services. We do need to plug back into like the third space, not third space, the gym, which I was a member of. I mean, but literally the third space, what's happening online is a mirror and a portal to our own inner worlds. And for some people, they've got a lot of inner demons that they need support with. I talk about this in my book, that the mental health services in the UK just was not prepared for this avalanche of people being online, and the PTSD that was emerging from it, and the kind of fear and anxiety that was emerging from it, which could emerge from any form of tech or solution, right? You've got people who are addicted to gaming, addicted to their PlayStations, addicted to music instruments, addicted to photography. We can form addiction to anything. So how do we as a family, our village, our chosen village, as individuals, as our schools, create different, healthier relationships with tech?
You've talked a lot, you talk about it in the book, and like one of the things that I know, because I follow you on social media, is you take breaks What are the other things people can do if people are listening now and they're like, okay, my New Year's resolution is going to be to like buy Shay's book and do like, what are like a couple of things that people can do to disrupt that? Because you're right, it's like we can't just unconsciously be hooked on these phones and machines and just be like, it's Mark Zuckerberg's fault. You know, there's a lot we can blame him for, but
Yeah.
you know, we also use these devices. So what are a couple of things people could do?
We're coming to the end of the year. My biggest tip at this time of the year, sorry, is to review where you are online. So Google yourself, search for your name, maybe where you went to school, your university, see what social platforms you're on, what websites you're part of, what blogs you're part of, and ask yourself, do you still want to be on there? Like clean up your digital footprint, right? Which is again lend into stuff that we can do around climate change. I think then people will see, raw, like I'm really online, like my stuff is really exposed, and I think it then is a quite sobering for people to be a bit more intentional about where they're going next year. The other thing that I recommend doing is writing for yourself, even if you put it on your phone and it's a screenshot for a bit. What are your intentions of why you're showing up online? Is it that you want to be on Instagram purely for bands? Is it you're on TikTok because you want to learn a new dance routine? Like being really intentional so that intention guides you rather than how the algorithm is guiding you.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And we should talk a bit about the algorithms because you sort of touched on it earlier. But I mean, the sort of fact that jumped out at me when I started doing more of this work is that at least 70% of the content people watch on YouTube is something the algorithm serves. So, you know, you might have gone on to look at how to fix I don't know, how to like fix something in your kitchen. But 70% of what we're watching is the like recommended thing that comes up next. It's not what we went on there for. And you sort of mentioned that with other platforms, that it's this curated algorithm powered thing designed to like hook you in. So like bearing in mind that like what do we do about those algorithms then? Because like, you know, one of the things I really like about your work is you don't tell people just to log off and to not use these platforms. And I think, you know, we can talk about that too, but it's like it's almost a bit of a privileged position to say, well, these
Absolutely.
things are bad, don't use them.
It's also, when did you decide it was bad? Because when it's been bad for certain communities for a good few years, no one was saying anything, right?
So now it's
and
affecting
now
you.
it's affecting you because you can't access porn straight away. Oh no, now it's in moral panic. Yeah, I don't have time for that.
Oh my God, that's so true. I did literally have a friend who was panicking about not being able to access porn. He's like, maybe I have to go on a dating app. That, yeah, it's a real window into his world.
Oh,
And
wow.
that, yeah, he discovered a VPN, so it's a happy ending for him. But yeah, that sense of like sort of, yeah, almost, it does feel like a very privileged position to be like, well, I'm just not going to use these platforms. They're bad. So given we are using them, like what are your kind of principles when you look at these platforms? Because you're not a log off, delete the app person generally.
I really try and pay attention to my body. I really try and pay attention to my breath. If I notice that I've got like quite shallow breathing, and I can't catch my breath again, I can't do the 4-box breath where you hold your breath in for 4, you breathe out for 4, that
Yeah.
little trick. If I can't do that, that tells me I'm actually engaging with social media in a way to mask something, to distract from something. And sometimes you need distractions, right? Sometimes it's nice to look at Idris Elba.
Oh,
But
cute dog, Idris
yeah,
or
or
cute dog or
Idris or a
both.
cute dog, right? And sometimes it's nice to reminisce, but actually the recommender system doesn't give you enough time to come out of that trance and take a step back. So for me, it's really making sure that you give yourself time allocations. I think that's the best way. Is like, I only want to spend 15 minutes looking at this.
This is what I have now, yeah.
Right? Because we don't go to the gym and say we're going to do 3 hours on this, right? Everything in moderation, right? And we can do that for ourselves. The idea that we're now asking platforms to tell us what, how many hours we can spend on the platform or how many minutes, it's like, again, we're abdicating our power so much to these platforms. And I think it's really dangerous if we do that and then we end up having a government that is more extreme than we like. And that means exactly they're going to be in hands of all of that. So I think the recommendation system does need transparency, though. I think academia are fighting a lot to have access to how these recommendation systems work. And then when they do get access, they get fobbed off with PR statements. So there is a disconnect between the technical team in these platforms and the academics who can technically challenge them. And advocacy seems to get squeezed in the middle, where academia are telling advocacy what to do, and the advocacy go to tech companies and they get fobbed off with PR. Actually, the three of them need to be in the conversation about these recommendation systems. And again, what's the principles we're saying that they want them to be on? Because we have the Advertising Standards Agency regulating the types of adverts that we should be seeing, particularly at peak times like of X Factor or Strictly Come Dancing. And that's because there is this transparency around what we see as healthy and what is good for society. I just don't get why it's so complicated when it comes to tech.
You've been on the left as an activist, as a politician. Do you feel that, because, there's a lot of chat about cancel culture, and I think there's a lot of like nonsense spread by just like bad faith actors, but do you feel that that space to disagree has got smaller for people on the left?
The space to disagree has gotten smaller. I think abuse and call out culture has been used or is masqueraded as accountability, and it's not. I think people have parasocial relationships and think they're closer to people and think that they can speak on their behalf or speak to them or speak about them. I don't think we talk in edifying ways. And I feel like I'm sounding very like my old school Christian kind of 15, 16-year-old. But like, I think those are important principles. Like, we don't speak in the betterment of people. Like, there is such a quickness to tear down and gossip. And then it causes such fear. And again, fear is the recipe for supremacy. Fear is the recipe for coercive control. Fear is the recipe for division and rule. And we also need to see how, if we aren't able to hold discomfort and disagree, when it comes to big topics like we saw this week, Girl Guides have made a decision on allowing trans girls to be a part of their community. When it comes to these really big, contentious conversations, where some people will say it shouldn't be contentious, we don't have the practice. We're not building the muscle for conflict. And then when it comes to these really big things that I do also think get implanted by the right to cause division, we're not ready to have the conversation. We don't have a space to even have the conversation.
Because we're used to sort of yelling and just like taking camp in one position.
And I did fall for that, right? At some point, I felt that like, someone being able to like really critique like what was going on in the system meant that they were really clued up and they just needed to be able to get in certain positions and power to be able to do their thing. And then realizing when you give people power who just critique, they don't know how to build. And we're not actually working as an ecosystem of people who can critique. So the academics who can helpfully critique, to work with advocacy who can do the building and the narrative and the storytelling, to work with your visionaries and to work with your weavers and to work with your healers. Like, we need our healers of all types, right? Our talking therapists, our EDMR folks, our music therapists, all sorts, to help us with online harms. And that's why I do think the online safety bill is like just the first step of like what we need to be doing, because it's only talking about harm reduction rather than repair of the harms of the last 10, 15 years of an unregulated tech. And I think it's going to be tested under a more conservative right-wing government.
There's a bit of a call to arms there for us to show up as citizens and as a community, and that even in a world where bad actors are regulated properly, do pay their fair share, like there is still a burden on us to show up well, to treat each other well, to build up muscles that mean we can have tough conversations. And I think that's like quite a nice call to arms of like, and one of the things I think is really great about the book, which again people should download or buy, which is like accepting these big power imbalances and saying there's still stuff for you to do for yourself, for your community. And another thing I want to just touch on, because I feel like it's something we have in common that I really enjoy about your politics, is also just that because a lot of the tech industry and then, lots of kind of nonprofit leadership is very white and middle class, just the specific ways that like technology and the internet have been, I get, not uncomplicatedly, but like have been really powerful and wonderful for like Black working class communities. And I think for me, that is the flip side of the times when I'm like, I need to just put these apps away. It's so terrible. It's like seeing Black creatives and comedians like build a platform for themselves online, like just before Elon bought Twitter, like the joy that was Black Twitter, Vine. And I wonder if you could talk a bit about that, like creativity and the joy and like the potential of the internet, and whether you still believe it's there.
Oh, I so believe it's there. I so believe it's there. And I think the way you've seen people like Muya,
Munya Chihuahua.
Moya,
Yeah.
Eddie Caddy. I think where you've seen them use these platforms for entertainment, joy, comedic expression is so important. But it makes me sad because it's come as a result of the cuts to art, right? It's come as a result of the cuts to art and culture. And I don't think we're going to win back kind of healthy societies or be able to even defeat the kind of online harms and the kind of tech bros if we don't engage with the arts and culture. And so the fact that we have social media as a way in which people can go viral and can make money for their families and, be able to kind of get themselves out of poverty is huge. But then it ends up engaging with another system like philanthropy, who I think have gotten a little bit lazy with their grant giving and giving to like kind of celebrities and giving to like what is famous and what is in the news rather than like a strategic approach. And again, then those that get famous kind of in the entertainment industry end up getting like really crap deals. And it feels like a repetition of history. Like I'm a grime head. I lived in East London, so I love grime and garage. And we saw when people finally got music deals and labels, they got like the worst offers, right? And so they finally like break out and they get the exposure and accessibility, but then there's not that kind of capacity building. That's not that should be alongside that kind of support. There's an assumption because they've gone from working class to middle class, they have the middle class social capital, and that isn't the case. And I very much had to learn the hard way of building the social capital and navigating it's like the equivalent of knowing to put your knife and fork together on a plate so that you let the people who are like taking the plates know that you're done with your food. Like, no one tells you these kind of social norms. You just have to learn it from like fucking up.
Yeah, you learn it from not doing. Yeah, you learn it from not doing it, or from like watching everyone else doing it. Yeah, and actually, I mean, I'm also a grime head. I feel like the nice thing about this generation of like grime and rap stars, like I'm thinking of Dave and Stormzy, is they do talk about mental health, and they do talk about like the challenges of social mobility. Because I think often for our communities, it's just been about you want to make it, you want to make money, and then you want to stunt and be like, I've made it, I've made this money. But actually, yeah, the pain and the friction and like the challenges of being one of the lucky ones who's like made it out of the end or like done well for themselves, like there's a cost to that too. And you're right, we eliminate the cost by investing in whole communities and not just like these talented few people that can like make a funny YouTube video and go viral. And yeah, again, I think it is like, whilst there are those brilliant examples, and Munya Chihuahua is a great one, because I think, you know, he's also now doing the job of, I'd say, the political establishment of just doing so much good satire. Like he's the person who put a great video out about Shabana Mahmood's immigration reforms, where he's like wearing a t-shirt on his head to pretend to be a woman. Like it's brilliant.
And not offensive. He's not offensive. He's not being misogynistic. So there is a way to still do it without being a dickhead.
Yeah, he's sort of come up, but without any of the support or infrastructure. And I think it is that those people are the exception now, because it's so hard for working class people to make it in the creative industries.
And do you know what those three people that we've named have in common? And I'll include Adele in that. They all take breaks. Munya said this week, like, you're going to be seeing less of me because I'm going to really be thinking more about like what I put out there. Stormzy took a break. Dave took a break, to the point where he talks about it in his album, where he said, well, yeah, it's referred to in his album, where him and Dave and Central C, they did a song. It went viral. Central C did the typical American tour. You know, he's featuring on every track. You know, he's there. And Dave said, like, I had to go away and really like sit with this. And then do you know what we then see in his album as well? Him talking to an elder, Kano. Chapter 16 is one of my favorite songs of all time. And they model intentionality, they model slowing down, they model not forgetting who they are and authenticity. And you ask me, and often people do, like, what's the one thing that we should do to kind of protect ourselves? It's just why I talk about self-care, because self-care helps us protect our authentic self, but to protect our individuality in a recommendation system or in an extremist culture that wants us to blend and be the same. We all actually need to go back to really being okay with diversity.
Oh, I think that's a nice note to end it on. It's like upbeat, but also it's a bit of a call to arms. And I feel like that's what a lot of your work does. Like, we've got to do the work as well as holding people to account. Thank you so much, Seyi. And I just want to say big thank you to Community Links and Catch 22 who provided this studio. If you live in East London, it's in Canning Town. It's a beautiful physical space where there are facilities for young people, the exact kind of things that we want to protect and save and have more of. So yeah, thank you for giving us the studio today. And thank you, Seyi, for joining me.
Thank you so much, Karen.